Wendell and Wild has been set loose upon the world. Or have been set loose upon the world, your choice. And we're going to consider what works and what doesn't on this episode of the Hour of the Wolf Reviews. Welcome to the Hour of the Wolf Reviews. I'm Dan Persons. This is a spin-off of Jim Freund's Hour of the Wolf, which airs on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York. And here we take the reviews I do for that show and then elaborate on them a little further, give you a better insight into my thoughts and feelings, such as they are, which is what we're going to do right now with the brand new spooky stop-motion animated film Wendell and Wild. So, first comes the review as aired, and then I'll be back with some more thoughts. Hour of the Wolf Review, air date October 31st, 2022. Boo! Wendell and Wild. Take one. I'm Dan Persons, and this is my Hour of the Wolf Review. I've got mixed feelings, profoundly mixed feelings, about Wendell and Wild, the new film that just debuted on Netflix. On the one hand, and I'll go out on a limb on this may be the greatest stop-motion animated film ever made. Like Phil Tippett did with Mad God earlier this year, director and co-writer Henry Selick has pulled all the stops out, and the results are nothing short of stunning. Every frame is a work of art, every sequence a ballet. As he has done before, Selick mixes mediums in his imagery, employing figure animation, paper cutouts, shadow animation, and the detail and precision with which it's all brought to life is downright breathtaking. You lose the sense that these are inanimate objects being manipulated before a camera, and buy into the idea that this is some sort of real, incredible, living world. Which makes it harder to admit that the story of Wendell and Wild is, and this is ironic considering this is a tale about demons, it's an ungodly mess. The basic concept is that a young girl, Kat, voiced by Lyric Ross, guilt-ridden over what she believes was her responsibility for her parents' deaths, makes a deal with a couple of scheming demons, Wendell and Wild, voiced respectively by Keegan-Michael Key and Jordan Peele, to bring her parents back. That's fine enough, but Selick, who co-wrote the script with Jordan Peele, mirrors his animation style by throwing in what's really too much detail into his story. So the Catholic girls' school where Kat winds up has a trio of cool girls who, in a nice twist for these kind of things, actually turn out to be pretty cool, and a teacher and wheelchair-bound janitor who are secret demon hunters, and a trans boy who's struggling with an epic piece of artwork, and a conniving principal who's in league with the town's leading couple who are trying to build a commercial prison on the site of the brewery that was once owned by Kat's parents by resurrecting the dead to commandeer the town council. It all fits together in a way, but it feels scattered and unfocused. I get the sense that in the tradition of classic animation, Selick let the visual imagery drive the story and just came up with too much neat stuff that he didn't have the heart to edit down. As befits a work in which Jordan Peele is involved, Wendell and Wild has some surprisingly pointed things to say about the commercial prison industry and how institutionalized racism drives poverty. And I do like that, with the exception of the greedy principal and his entitled benefactors, there are really no two-dimensional evil characters here, including the demons. I just wish Selick exhibited more discipline in his storytelling. As for me, I'm going to treat Wendell and Wild as a beautiful display of bravura animation and leave it at that. For Hour of the Wolf, I'm Dan Persons. And that was the original review, but stick with me until after the break when I have some more thoughts. do me a favor, when you've got the time, and if you haven't already, go to YouTube and track down a film called Slow Bob in the Lower Dimensions. This was my first exposure to Henry Selick, and it pretty much was the world's first exposure as well. Prior to this, he was doing music videos and bumpers for MTV. I think this debuted on MTV's Liquid Television or Cartoon Sushi, and was actually a pilot for a half-hour film that never got made. But what I want you to notice is that you could draw a stylistic straight line from Slow Bob straight to Wendell and Wild. It's all there. The mix of medias, you've got your stop motion and cutout animation and live action. The creative use of body, English, and the animated figures. I wasn't kidding when I said in the review that the animation was balletic. Selick's characters move with a distinctive grace seen nowhere else, and they're always moving. The Fleischers have their characters bopping around to the music, even standing still, because the brothers believed an animated cartoon should be animated all the time. And I think some of that impulse got into Selick, which is good because that goes to my observation that his films teem with life. His characters seem to actually live and breathe, constantly in motion, constantly. And there's the distinctive Selick design sense, a little angular, and taking advantage of the physicality of the materials at hand. What I'm guessing is wood, but might be some kind of plastic, metal, paper, whatever they're manipulating. It's all beautiful. What you may also notice about Slow Bob is that it signals a particular flaw that was also ported over to Wendell and Wild. It has maybe too many cool ideas. You have a pair of stop-motion twins who share the same body, and Slow Bob sleeps on the ceiling and takes his orders from a brace of lizards who also help transport him into the two-dimensional kingdom where the photographed citizenry are being threatened by scissors, and for his heroism, he's awarded a magic wristwatch, but before he can use it, he's zapped back into the third dimension, where the twins attack by splashing him with paint that zaps his powers, I think. I'm not sure for what reason, because the film ends there. And this is easier to take in a short film with very little dialogue. You can just delight in the vivid imagination of all these elements. And it should be noted that for all that this aired on MTV, there's nothing about Slow Bob that wouldn't have worked for Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network, which is where I'm guessing Selick was actually aiming. The problem with doing all of this in a feature film, particularly something aiming for the mainstream like Wendell and Wild, is that you've got to get a story to support all this stuff, with characters explaining themselves and motivations and like that. There are too many good ideas here, too many visually brilliant elements for a story to catch up to. The demon-fighting teacher can burrow underground, and the janitor has a wheelchair with a built-in floor buffer, and there's a sequence with the resurrected council members where they're partying it up, which would be neat if it lasted longer than 15 seconds. And I forgot to mention that Wendell and Wild are brothers being punished for daring to plan their own theme park by their father by being forced to live on his scalp, where they perpetually have to replant his hair using a machine that's part agricultural equipment and part pig. Oh, and the father has his own theme park built onto his belly. You see what I'm getting at here. The irony is that Phil Tippett's Mad God similarly overteams with visionary imagery, but I think it gets away with it because the narrative is at best a rough structure to hang the concepts on. The story is pretty much a dude travels through a world and discovers disturbing stuff. The narrative is so loose there that the film essentially restarts halfway through. Wendell and Wild is cursed with having to tell an actual story, and wedging too many characters, a few too many of which have actual arcs, and too much stuff into a real narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It just hasn't worked out here. And it kills me, because I was eagerly looking forward to this. And even now, I want to love it for its ambitiousness and its technical brilliance and the sheer dazzling imagination of its imagery. And so I'm going to do that. Bleep the story. You're not going to see a more mind-boggling display of animation proficiency this year than Wendell and Wild. And yes, I know Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is coming up, but until then, I'm putting my money on this. That's my story. I'm sticking with it. But let me remind you that if you love science fiction, fantasy, enchantment, and the imagination, you should be listening to Hour of the Wolf with Jim Freund most every Monday evening at 9 p.m. on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York, or streaming through TuneIn or at WBAI.org. And the show's archives are there as well. And if you want to write me, send that email to hotwolfreviews@upstartcompany.com. I'm Dan Persons, your host and producer. The show was recorded at the studios of Upstart Company. The theme music is by Johnny Holiday, licensed through Creative Commons. This is an Hour of the Wolf production. Please vote. Please. See you next week.